Dr. Evelyn Carter had always been obsessed with time. Time was the one resource no one could replenish, the one thing even the wealthiest and most powerful could never buy more of. She often joked that if she could bottle time, she'd be the richest person on Earth. But deep down, it wasn't a joke. It was her life's mission. Her breakthrough came in the form of a synthetic compound she called Somnox 9, a drug that promised to eliminate the need for sleep. The implications were staggering. Imagine a world where people could work, learn, and create without wasting a third of their lives unconscious. It was revolutionary. It was dangerous. And it was ready for human trials. The lab was a sterile, fluorescent-lit facility buried deep in the Nevada desert, far from prying eyes. The test subjects were 5 carefully selected individuals, each paid a small fortune to participate in the experiment. They were strangers to one another, chosen for their lack of pre-existing conditions and their willingness to sign airtight non-disclosure agreements. There was Marcus, a former soldier with a stoic demeanor, Priya, a med student with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue, Javier, a struggling artist looking for inspiration, Sarah, a single mother desperate for money, and Daniel, a thrill seeker who lived for the adrenaline rush. They were all different, but they shared one thing in common: they needed this. The first week was uneventful. The subjects were given daily doses of Somnox 9 and monitored around the clock. Blood tests, brain scans, and psychological evaluations were conducted hourly. The drug worked exactly as Dr. Carter had hoped. The subjects reported feeling more alert, more focused, and more energized than ever before. They didn't feel the need to sleep, not even a hint of drowsiness. It was a resounding success. But then, things started to change. Day 8, the first hallucination. It was Marcus who noticed it first. He was sitting in the common room, staring at the blank television screen, when he saw something move in the reflection. He turned around, but the room was empty. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to fatigue, even though he didn't feel tired. Later that night, Priya saw it too. She was in the bathroom, brushing her teeth, when she caught a glimpse of a figure standing behind her in the mirror. She spun around, but there was no one there. Her heart raced as she tried to rationalize what she'd seen. Maybe it was the fluorescent lights playing tricks on her eyes. Maybe it was the stress of being cooped up in the lab. But deep down, she knew it was something else. By the next morning, all 5 subjects had seen the figure. It was always the same, a tall, shadowy silhouette with no discernible features. It appeared in reflections, in the corners of their vision, and sometimes even in their dreams, though they weren't supposed to be dreaming at all. Dr. Carter dismissed their concerns. Hallucinations are a known side effect of sleep deprivation, she explained. Your brains are adjusting to the lack of REM cycles. It's nothing to worry about. But the subjects weren't convinced. The figure didn't feel like a hallucination. It felt real. And it felt malevolent. Day 12, the shared dream. The first shared hallucination happened during a routine cognitive test. The subjects were seated in a circle, each hooked up to an EEG machine to monitor their brain activity. Dr. Carter instructed them to close their eyes and focus on a series of images she projected on the wall. At first, everything was normal. But then, the images began to change. The serene landscapes and abstract shapes twisted into something darker, something wrong. The subjects opened their eyes, but the images didn't go away. They were no longer in the lab. They were standing in a vast, empty field under a blood-red sky. The figure was there, standing in the distance. It was closer now, close enough to see its elongated limbs and featureless face. It didn't move, but its presence was overwhelming, like a weight pressing down on their chests. "What the hell is this?" Javier shouted, his voice trembling. "It's not real," Priya said, though she didn't believe it herself. "It's just a hallucination. We're all seeing the same thing because we've been primed by the drug." But then the figure moved. It didn't walk or run. It simply appeared closer, as if it had teleported. The subjects screamed and backed away, but no matter how far they went, the figure was always the same distance from them. And then, it spoke. Its voice was a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "This is not your place." The field began to dissolve, and the subjects found themselves back in the lab, gasping for breath. Dr. Carter was frantically checking their vitals, her face pale. "What happened?" she demanded. "Your brain activity spiked off the charts." It was like you were all having the same nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Sarah said, her voice shaking. It was real. We were there. We saw it. Dr. Carter tried to reassure them, but her hands were trembling. She had never seen anything like this before. Day 15, the shadows grow. The hallucinations became more frequent and more intense. The figure no longer appeared only in reflections or dreams. It was everywhere. It lurked in the corners of the lab, watching them with its blank, featureless face. It whispered to them when they were alone, its voice echoing in their minds. "You're not supposed to be awake," it said. "You're trespassing." The subjects began to unravel. Marcus started carrying a knife he'd stolen from the lab kitchen, convinced the figure was real and would attack him at any moment. Priya stopped eating, afraid the food was contaminated. Javier locked himself in his room and refused to come out, muttering about the void and the gatekeepers. Sarah and Daniel clung to each other, their fear driving them closer together. Dr. Carter tried to maintain control, but even she wasn't immune to the effects of Somnox 9. She started seeing the figure too, though she refused to admit it. She doubled down on her research, convinced the drug could still work if she just tweaked the formula. But the more she worked, the more she felt the figure's presence looming over her, watching her every move. Day 20, the breaking point. The final straw came when Marcus attacked Javier. He claimed Javier had been possessed by the figure, that his eyes had turned black and his voice had changed. The others managed to pull him off, but the damage was done. Javier was badly injured, and Marcus was locked in a padded room, screaming about how the figure was coming for them all. Dr. Carter knew she had to end the experiment. She began preparing a counteragent to reverse the effects of Somnox 9, but it was too late. The figure had other plans. That night, the subjects were dragged into another shared hallucination. This time, they were in a labyrinth of endless corridors, the walls pulsating like living flesh. The figure was there, waiting for them. "You thought you could escape," it said. "But there's no escape. Not here." The subjects ran, but the corridors twisted and turned, leading them in circles. The figure pursued them, its presence growing stronger with every step. They could feel its breath on their necks, its cold, skeletal fingers brushing against their skin. One by one, they fell. Marcus was the first, his screams echoing through the labyrinth as the figure dragged him into the shadows. Priya was next, her sharp mind no match for the figure's relentless pursuit. Javier, Sarah, and Daniel followed, their cries fading into silence. Dr. Carter was the last. She tried to fight, to reason with the figure, but it was no use. It loomed over her, its featureless face inches from hers. "You thought you could cheat time," it said. "But time cheats no one." And then, everything went black. The lab was found abandoned a week later. The subjects were gone, their whereabouts unknown. Dr. Carter's notes were scattered across her desk, filled with frantic scribbles about the figure and the void. The final entry was a single sentence, written in shaky handwriting. "We were never supposed to wake up." To this day, no one knows what happened to the subjects of the sleep experiment. Some say they were driven mad by the drug and wandered into the desert. Others believe they were taken by something far worse, something that exists in the space between waking and dreaming. But one thing is certain, Somnox 9 was never tested again. The formula was destroyed, and all records of the experiment were sealed. Dr. Carter's research was buried, along with the truth about what happens when you try to cheat sleep. Because sleep isn't just a biological necessity. It's a barrier. A wall that separates us from something we were never meant to see. And once that wall is broken, there's no going back.